Well, with cost of living pressures mounting and other economic circumstances challenging many households, employment experts are seeing some increasing trends play out in the workplace. To talk us through that, Joydeep joining us from People and Culture Strategies. Joydeep, good to catch up with you again. Of course, we know those pressures that Australian households are feeling at the moment, but what pressures have come to bear in the workplace then?
So I think at the starting point is usually, as often happens, the concern around job security. When employees see or hear that there are redundancies happening or retrenchments happening or other downsizing type activities happening within, for example, other parts of their own organisation, or it might be other organisations within their industry, naturally there is an apprehension as to how much job certainty and job security they have. I think what has changed, though, probably in the last few years, is that the way in which employees respond to that now is quite different to how they may have responded and probably did respond, a decade or certainly 2 or 3 decades ago, where the response would have far more been a lot more fatalistic. People perhaps trusting the decisions of leadership, the decisions of management a lot more, and certainly not doing what we see employees doing a lot more now, which is being a little bit more assertive, adversarial, aggressive, often posturing and positioning to try to put themselves in a position that if they are earmarked for a termination of employment, for reasons of redundancy or for purported reasons of redundancy, that they feel that they may be in a stronger position to leverage a claim or threaten a claim as a result of conduct that they might engage in prior to that. And that's something it's not just an isolated thing that we're seeing, it's actually becoming a bit of a trend.
Is it the job of the employer to reassure their employees in times like this where, well, we certainly have warnings from the Reserve Bank, for instance, that unemployment is likely to increase as the economy weakens, or at least should the workplace be transparent in their strategy and how they're likely to negotiate that?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think employers are often faced in the invidious position of not wanting to come across as being alarmist if they are transparent with their employees about the circumstances that they're facing. And an understandable concern for a lot of employers is, well, if we let our people know that things are challenged for us and that we may have to be making some tough decisions at some stage in the future, well, the people who are probably the greatest risk of being lost fairly quickly after that kind of communication are the very people who we don't want to lose and the people we need to keep, because they're the ones who are going to be marketable. They're the ones who will say, well, look, I can find a job elsewhere that's paying me at least this, or if not more. I may have rejected offers or approaches up to now. I'm now going to make those kinds of moves. So that's one of the reasons for the concern around employers in terms of that transparency. But I don't think it changes the fact that good employers should be regularly communicating with their employees within the limits of what are known issues and known circumstances, and avoid getting into the territory of speculation. And I think the employers that do well in this space from a employee communication and transparency point of view know exactly how to strike that balance. So that there absolutely is a level of transparency and openness, but they avoid what moves into that realm of speculation, the what ifs. And it's often hard because employees will ask that question, well, does this mean that my job is at risk, or are you thinking about redundancies? And often the answers to those questions are quite inadequate from those in management or leadership roles, and that's what causes the problems.
If a business is faced with those issues of trying to cut costs, and that does inevitably mean redundancies, does an employee therefore have the right to challenge that? In terms of, do they have a claim, if you like, for unfair dismissal?
Yeah, so the way unfair dismissal laws have been set up in Australia for a number of years now, at least on their face, say, look, if it's a genuine redundancy, and the definition of that is that the employer no longer wishes a position to be performed by anyone. If it meets that definition and subject to the employer having gone through the relevant obligations in relation to consultation and the relevant obligations that may exist to explore redeployment for the individual, then that individual who has lost their job because of a redundancy is not able to bring an unfair dismissal claim. However, there's a marked disconnect between that theoretical stated position and what actually happens in practice. What happens in practice is that there are a number of workarounds in relation to what would otherwise be a prohibition around a redundancy being challenged. And those workarounds are often cited to be an employee may argue that the reason that they were chosen for redundancy was because of some discriminatory reason. Now, there are a whole range of avenues available to an employee if they consider they've been discriminated against, and that discrimination could be for any number of reasons: their race, their age, their gender, the fact that they've come back from parental leave, the fact that they may have working from home arrangements, or whatever else it might be. So these are the kinds of claims that really muddy the waters. And what we find particularly in the major cities within Australia is that the appetite for litigation by employees is at an all-time high. People are aware of their rights far more so than has ever been the case, and they are willing to be creative in terms of the kinds of claims that they bring. So redundancies theoretically should not be capable of being challenged by a dismissed employee, but they regularly are.
Does that therefore mean perhaps in terms of setting out employment contracts that employers are much more careful and building in some of those safeguards to make it easier to dismiss their employees?
I think so. Contracts will get an employer to a certain point, but what we're really dealing with is employee behaviour. And if I reflect on the cases that I advise on a daily basis, what the real issues are very rarely about someone genuinely feeling that a contractual obligation has not been met. What causes an employee typically to litigate against their employer is far more about quite raw emotion and sentiment, a feeling that they have not been treated fairly, a feeling that they haven't been treated equally, a feeling that they haven't been respected, a feeling that their manager or supervisor had it in for them. So the actual catalysts for employment litigation, while they are ultimately framed as against a contract or an enterprise agreement or an award or whatever it might be, are really driven by these behaviours. And so for an employer, absolutely understanding your obligations and setting them out as clearly as you can in contracts and policies will help. But you really have to invest in how do you work with your employees in building trust, and particularly trying to enhance your leadership capability within your organisation, so that at least employees don't feel that their managers or supervisors are out to get them or are singling them out for adverse treatment.
And Joydeep, do we find perhaps demographics at play here for employees, depending on the age of the employee? Perhaps they've just started work, or perhaps they're close to retirement, that their response will be different in circumstances that you've been talking of?
Absolutely. And we often say, only partially jokingly, that in some organisations redundancy is almost aspirational because of the generosity of what might be an employer's policy or what might be contained in an enterprise agreement that says an employee in a redundancy situation gets several weeks per completed year of service. Now, if you've done 25, 30 years in an organisation and you're relying on a clause that says you get 4 weeks per year of service, you're looking at a couple of years' pay that's going to be taxed quite favourably. And if you're at a stage in your career where you don't particularly need to or want to continue working or not working at the same level that you have been previously, well, that may well be something that fits in very nicely. And similarly, individuals who are marketable, who want to explore things, for them a short period of service and being made, having their roles made redundant is far less of a concern. So you're absolutely right, Andrew. I mean, these things impact different people differently. But some of the core themes, I think, are for employers in particular is that point around that balance between transparency, but just as critically, engagement between their leaders and their people. That's really going to be what helps everyone in this situation.